The Vision 2030 aims at transforming Zambia into a prosperous middle-income nation. The vision comprises 3 priority sectors: economic growth and wealth creation, social investment and human development, and creation of an enabling environment for sustainable socio-economic development. But is Zambia ready to turn this vision into reality amid the ever-changing climate, which is said to be affecting social and economic development of many nations globally? Welcome to the first edition of Think 2044. And today on the program, we'll be discussing government strategies in addressing climate change towards the Vision 2030. I am your host, Mark Fason Mukuka. Joining me on set is the Permanent Secretary in charge of Development Planning and Administration in the Ministry of National Development Planning, Mr. Chola Chabala. Sir, welcome to 2044.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome viewers to this important program.
Thank you so much. Before we get further into the program, let's take a short break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Climate change is real. Get involved. Start a green conversation today. Think 2044. Call the free hotline 2044 for more information. This advert is brought to you by the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, PPCR, under the Ministry of National Development Planning with support from the World Bank Group and the Africa Development Bank.
Welcome back to Think 2044. Today, we are discussing government strategies in addressing climate change towards the Vision 2030. Joining me is the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of National Development Planning in charge of Development Planning and Administration, Mr. Chola Chabala. So once again, welcome to the program. And how is business in the ministry?
Well, thank you very much. Business in the ministry is interesting, challenging, but one step at a time.
Okay, perfect. Looking at the Vision 2030, what are some of the national policies that the government is putting in place concerning climate change?
Yeah, first let me start by saying that the vision sets the development trajectory for the country. It runs for a period. In other countries, it could be 20 years. For the Republic of Zambia, it's for a period of 25 years. In other destinations, it could go up to 30 years. And as we get to the vision, we have building blocks, which are national development plans. And they are medium-term in nature. They run for a period of 5 years. And within the subsisting national development plan, you can actually get a few building blocks or pillars that contribute to attainment of the Vision 2030. So that's one of the approaches we use in terms of moving towards meeting the Vision 2030. The other one is, if you have a plan, it has to be translated into tools that will enable your aspirations to be financed. So we have a number of development financing mechanisms. The medium-term expenditure framework translates the development plans into budgetary provisions. And then we've got the annual budgets.
Okay. We have had a number of development plans, national development plans, and this time around we are looking at the 7th National Development Plan. Mm. How feasible have these plans been in combating climate change?
First, we need to be realistic that the discussion around climate change was not as intense as it is now, because I think it's in the recent past when the world actually came together to realize that the world, there was a variation, the changes in the way in the climate change patterns We've seen increases in floods. We have seen persistent droughts during certain periods. And then, of course, the weather patterns are changing. If you remember way back, in October, we could have the first rains. That's no longer the case. Sometimes you don't even have rains in October, November. We have the first rains in December. And the first, one of the interventions, some of the many interventions was, there was a summit in Johannesburg, okay, which was dubbed the Earth Summit, to discuss issues around the need to embark on sustainable development pathways with a view to ensure that we undertake economic development without necessarily causing harm to the environment. And later on, I think we had the Rio Summit that basically adopted a number of overarching strategies for member states to follow to ensure that we put in place mitigation and adaptation measures coherently as a globe to reduce greenhouse emissions, and also to ensure that we are within the current capacity that the Earth can actually sustain in terms of creating a balance between economic development as well as ensuring that the environment is left intact, and we also do not create effects with regard to advancing our socio-economic indicators.
Okay. Talking of treaties, Zambia is among the many nations globally that has signed, or let's say is a signatory to some of these treaties, most especially on climate change. How have these been translated in some of the policies that Zambia is formulating in combating climate change?
First, I'd like to mention that Zambia is part of the COP21. That was recently agreed upon by world leaders in France. And arising from us being a party to COP21, we are supposed to integrate the provisions of the COP21 into our national development plans. You rightly pointed out that we have the 7th National Development Plan, which provides overarching policy and program directions, which we have to undertake as a country. But beyond that, we are supposed to come up with an implementation plan. And I have a document here, which is basically the implementation plan. So within the implementation plan of the 7th National Development Plan, under the pillar regarding reducing poverty and vulnerability, we have very comprehensive strategies and identified programs and projects that will help advance our adaptation and mitigation programs. Okay.
How readily available is this document in terms of accessibility to the members of the public so that they can browse through and get to know some of the content?
If you go to the ministry website, you'll be able to find a copy of this document. Come to the Ministry of National Development Planning, we'll be able to give you copies. Beyond that, within all the provinces, we have provincial planning units. We also have district planning units. Our officers throughout the country went around disseminating the 7th National Development Plan and its implementation plan.
Okay, interesting. Now, how has climate change affected Zambia's economic growth?
Not long ago, 2015, before 2015, we had been consistently growing our economy at an average of 6.1% in terms of GDP growth. And we're one of the fastest growing economies. We had one of the worst droughts in 2015, and the growth was actually downgraded to a possible 6% to slightly below 4%. So taking away a possible 2% growth in GDP. Now, just 2% alone in other destinations is a remarkable growth. Now, one of the factors that actually is attributed to that downgrading of the growth rate was that we had very severe droughts. I think at that point, our total generation capacity was somewhere, electricity generation capacity was somewhere around 2,300 to 2,500. And if I remember the figures correctly, I think we could have lost somewhere around 700 or more megawatts in terms of electricity production. What does that do to the economy? when you cannot produce, you can't industrialize, you cannot create jobs, you can't diversify the economy, you can't reduce poverty, you cannot actually promote industrialization in the rural areas. So if you want to reduce high levels of inequality, which we are grappling with because our Gini coefficient is over 0.59, you can't do that because you can't direct investment in rural areas with a view to ensure that the levels of marginalization between the rural and urban economies is lower. You cannot enhance human development because a majority of the people, especially in rural areas, that actually are supposed to benefit from innovations, innovation in terms of technology, cannot access that because one of the major inputs is energy. So there are a number of things that basically get thrown in disarray.
Okay. Now, agriculture is mostly conducted in rural areas, and these are the people that are likely to be affected more when it comes to climate change, despite it affecting almost everyone.
Yeah.
Are there any deliberate policies that your ministry is putting in place to help the rural farmer come out of these impacts on climate change?
Absolutely. I think when you're intervening, or if you are undertaking climate change interventions, you've got two major strategies, and that is adaptation and mitigation. From agricultural point of view, you have a combination of both. Mitigations are those programs where you basically try to come up with investment portfolios in areas where you want to reduce global warming. You also actually do mitigation with regard to huge investment in energy, with a view to ensure that you have production throughout the year. Now, if you don't have rainfall, okay, and you have, for instance, in the northern part of Zambia, where we have got huge water bodies, and electricity generation was constant, you have an increase in an energy mix, you can actually improve your irrigation system. And without relying so much on rain-fed agriculture, you can adapt and use irrigation and be in a position to produce meaningful outputs to enable people cope with the reduction in rainfall patterns. We are not able to do that. If we are not able to do that, then it means that your adaptation strategies are failing. So one of the strategies that are contained, to come back to your question, in the 7th National Development Plan, is to increase our energy mix. Right now, we are somewhere around 3% in terms of energy mix. Our target, by the way, it's not very easy to increase that rapidly. The 2030 target is to increase our energy, alternative energy sources to 15%. Within the 7 NDP, we want to raise that to 5% to enable the rural farmers cope with the vagaries of the weather and be in a position to produce at least something to enable them meet the challenges that are associated with reduction in food production.
What are you doing to address some of these challenges, the perceived challenges, especially in meeting the Vision 2030?
Of course, any development interventions are met with a number of bottlenecks here and there, okay? And the number one thing is to create a supportive environment to ensure that the strategies contained within the 7th National Development Plan are effectively implemented. We are dealing with issues related to land management, okay, to make land readily available and for everyone to access it, use it as an empowerment mechanism, and use it as a means for those that cannot access technology, okay, go to the banks, acquire resources, and be in a position to invest in innovative approaches to agricultural production, for instance. Mm-hmm. The other aspect is government is decisively dealing with the issue associated with devolving the deployment of resources to lower levels through decentralization. We are accelerating the implementation of the fiscal decentralization and the devolution of functions. Mm-hmm. And we also dealing with the a number of laws are being reformed. The Public Finance Act is being reformed. The Planning and Budgeting Act is also on the table of Cabinet, with a view to create coherence between our national development plans and the budget, and to ensure that our intentions within the climate change subsector are transformed into reality.
Okay, thank you so much. You are still watching Think 2044. Shortly, we'll be coming back. We take a short break.
Trees cover 30% of our planet. They play a huge part in absorbing gases such as carbon dioxide, which is turned into oxygen. Thousands of trees are cut down every year for charcoal production, agricultural purposes.
Dry, infertile land leading to crop failure, inflation and hunger. All this contributing to the climate change. Climate change is real. Plant a tree, save the earth. Get involved.
Think 2044. Call the 3 hotline 2044 for more information. This advert is brought to you by the Ministry of National Development Planning, Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, PPCR, with support of the World Bank Group and the African Development Bank.
Welcome back. This is Think 2044, and today we are discussing government strategies in addressing climate change towards the Vision 2030. I am with the Permanent Secretary in charge of Development Planning and Administration in the Ministry of National Development Planning, Mr. Chola Chabala. So maybe we just go through some of the contents of the 7th National Development Plan that supports climate change.
Great. First, the 7th National Development Plan is framed in a manner that we have actually moved away from the sector approach to an integrated multi-sector approach. I would want to say that in the plan you're not going to find a chapter, for instance, purely dedicated to health, because we tend to think that health tackled independent of education, for instance, tackled independent of water and sanitation, okay, will cannot fully be realized in terms of the objectives. If we are intervening in health, okay, what is it that we want to achieve? We want to achieve the formation of a buoyant, effective, and productive human capital. Most of the people tend to associate climate change with one pillar of development, which is environment, okay? As you know, that climate change does affect the 3 critical pillars of development: social, economic, and environment. If you have a community that is domiciled on one side of the river and there's a bridge, and the bridge is not built in such a way that it's climate proofed, and you have one rain season or flash floods, the bridge is washed away. What happens normally is that if you have a kilometer apart across the river where people access health facilities or education, they'll not be able to access those facilities. So they'll be cut away. So their health, their health will be impaired. And we also have diseases that emerge as a result of increase in humidity. So if you don't actually have adaptation and mitigation measures to contain these huge spikes in climate change, you can have diseases emerging as a result of climate change, okay? And water and sanitation, okay? When you have the water systems, when you have the sewer system clogged up as a result of floods, which end up again into your pipes, you have a situation where people start drinking dirty water. And that also has an effect on the health of the people.
Okay. While promoting and supporting an integrated approach, what are you doing to ensure that our farmers who are not into the private sector, say, but those that are being supported by government are protected so that even as they are doing their business, there is a win-win situation in as much as we want to fight climate change and bringing on board private sector?
First, what is important from the climate change perspective is to come up with the various adaptation mechanisms. For instance, some farmers, maybe in the Western Province, are losing land, which they use when there are floods. So in order to ensure that we provide the required protection for those farmers, we are dredging canals to reclaim the land. And we're also supporting farmers to we're creating an interface between the private sector that have got the innovation and the ingenuity with the local farmers so that we can have a mix. It's supposed to be a win-win situation. Standing alone on their own, traditional peasant farmers cannot enhance productivity if we do not infuse the new technologies and various adaptation mechanisms, coming up with new hybrid seeds that will enable them survive even in low rainfall periods, or be in a position to adapt to the changes in the weather pattern. So those are some of a number of innovations that we're putting in place.
PS, are you receiving any form of support in terms of finances from the different stakeholders that you are working with?
Yeah, I basically just talked about the program that we are undertaking in Western Province. I think it's been so successful because some of these artifacts that the local people are developing out of their own innovation has attracted actually the World Bank to put in more money with a view to make sure that there's a link between, because what is important is to create a value chain between those that are producing different innovations and link them up to the private sector and the international market. And I'm glad to say that the World Bank has actually provided further support to the tune of $14 million to create that window where we can link the local people, the private sector bringing their innovation up to the international market so that we have the entire value chain being addressed. And then added to that, you may be aware that recently Zambia accessed resources from the Green Climate Fund. We actually, as a country, should be proud of ourselves that of the total amount that was allocated to Africa by the GCF, Zambia alone accessed 51% of the resources. Now, under the GCF, they've also provided another window, which is the private sector window, where private sector can develop project proposals within the guidelines provided and sectors that are a priority sector within the 7th National Development Plan, work with ourselves and come up with the project proposals that can be submitted to the GCF through a simplified version. These can range from adaptation programs within the agricultural sector, mitigation projects within the energy space, the biogas, reducing gas emissions, and many other innovative approaches that the private sector can deem fit, but as long as they are compatible with our programs and strategies contained in our plan.
Thanks so much, PS. And from the media point of view, I would like to assure that we'll be ready to work with you in as far as disseminating information on climate change is concerned.
We really appreciate, and we're doing a fantastic job.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Well, our dear viewer, this is where we come to the end of the first edition of Think 2044. We have been discussing government strategies in addressing climate change towards the Vision 2030. I have been your host, Mark Fasson Mukuka, and I was joined by the Permanent Secretary in the midst of National Development Planning, in charge of Development Planning and Administration, Mr. Chola Chabala. Be sure to join us next time for yet another exciting Think 2044 program.
Think 2044. Do you realize this world won't be the same always? Think 2044. We have to emphasize that we have to change our way. By 2044, the temperatures will fall, and the flash floods will come, and our crops will start to drown. But we can save our time. We can save this place. We go home. Yes, we go home. Think 2044. We can think 2044.